I've got somebody covering for me today. So being that, I'll have my 20-year anniversary coming up in September, and downward slide of my fire career, moving on to running my charter and guide service as a year-round gig. And do both trips here in Vermont and out in New York, and in the process of transitioning my business full-time out to Lake Ontario in the years to come down the road. But we're going to talk a lot about what I do from a trout and salmon perspective. A lot of folks know I also run striper trips on the Hudson River. Happy to say that I'm down to one 6-hour trip left in the whole month of May right now. If anybody wants it, get a hold of me today. But we run striper trips down there in the month of May. And then I've been running my Champlain trips out of Tom's Marina on the Otter Creek. And my home water's pretty much southern part of Champlain. Don't fish north of the Broad Lake a heck of a lot. So a lot of stuff we're going to talk about, you guys will recognize pictures and faces and what I've built. Okay. So I put this PowerPoint together. Again, I'll thank Ron, Bill, and a bunch of others at Thorny, who's down south enjoying the warm and sun right now. All have supported me and helping me over the years, not only with tactics and information, but in getting me going and doing presenting. I'm an instructor for the State Fire Academy. I teach fire training, so I've got the gift of gab. And I was actually asked by the guys Yankee Sportsman's Classic a couple years ago and said, hey, we don't have anybody who does trout and salmon stuff. You want to do one? And I said, sure. Well, that one presentation I did now 2 years ago, a couple of presenters from other shows around New England saw it, and now I'm doing it 5 or 6 times a year. And just giving me a chance to chat a little bit about what I offer. As I said, career firefighter, almost 30 years in the fire service. Started in 1988 back, and I lived down in southern Vermont in the little town of Proctor. I had a secondary business I started almost 10 years ago doing a little consulting agency where I booked trips for outfitters and charter captains, and got this lame brain idea to get my captain's license and took off like a knucklehead and doing something else. But I used to book trips and had a chance to hunt and fish all around the country. I guess I was a little spoiled there before kids came along. I dabble in doing a few duck hunts both here in Vermont and New York, and Salmon River is another thing that I do some presentations on. The drift boat trip that we're going to give away tonight, the end of the presentation, is for steelhead out on the Salmon River. And the nice thing with the steelhead is they come in the river to eat the salmon eggs in the fall after the salmon spawn, and they stay there in the river throughout the wintertime, and they spawn right now in March and April and head back to the lake usually by May 1st. So it's a long season, a lot of competition out there, obviously with other guides and such, but just something totally different. So that's my boat. I run a 280 Baja. That's actually down on the Hudson River just last spring. And in the process, I said, making some transitions just because she's a lot of boat to move around 4 or 5 times a year, which is what I've been doing. And she will be back down in the Hudson again this spring. But 1st of June, she'll be in Oswego permanently for the summertime. And I've got a new toy sitting in the garage rigged up right now that I'm going to kind of keep undercover until springtime comes. It's going to be a lot easier for me to maneuver around and run trips here in Champlain, out in Lake Oneida as well. When I bought this, all my buddies were like, you're only going to tow that around so much. I learned fast. So that's what, again, the boat that I run my trips off from. So I have my presentation, folks, broke down into two different sections. First section is the species. And this first section I'm going to kind of fly through because I'm sure most of you understand the biodiversity of both Champlain, and I can, if I take any questions about Ontario, virtually the same line. And again, none of this stuff is hard and fast. First thing I'll say is I don't pro-staff for anybody. I'll tell you the equipment that I use and the lures, the stuff that has worked for me through experience and time. But again, a lot of people come to me that are just starting off in the trolling program and want to learn a little bit. And again, guys come out on the lake and say, okay, I've never done Lake Ontario before. I want to learn about divers and coppers. And okay, we're going to show you. Obviously, landlocks, again, depending on the time of year, you guys all know in the springtime or this time of year, probably up a lot closer to the surface. You can flatline them running stick baits and spoons and such. Same way that we do brown trout trips out on Lake Ontario in the springtime. Obviously, once that thermocline sets up, biggest thing I can tell you, and again, every year is learning. Last year, just alone, I caught landlocks in this lake 75 to 90 feet down. You can do it, and it's just toying around, trying different things. I, obviously, depending on the time of year and the temperature, catch the vast majority of my fish in these temperature lines, but sometimes deeper. And as you're going to see, we catch our salmon on Lake Ontario in a different area as well. Obviously, Lakers, they like it a little colder on the bottom. Again, we all know that you can catch them mixed in the springtime. Once summertime hits, where you're going to find them in different flats, reefs, and obviously a lot of the guys are getting into doing jigging now. You know the places that they're going to hang out. But again, you can catch some of the younger year classes of Lakers mixed right in trolling for salmon. Obviously, no doubt that we can get some good fish in this lake. It's a fantastic fishery. We're obviously spoiled rotten to have in our backyard a very diverse fishery from warm water to cold water species. You know, like I said, both of these catches are just last year. The Laker actually was LCI weekend. Unfortunately, I couldn't get the group to join in the Derby, but they decided to. And second fish in the day ended up being a Laker, was right around 14 pounds. So, you know, a fantastic fishery here that we should be pretty proud of. And obviously, we heard earlier today is constantly changing and doing the studies. So, this is my old boat. My first charter boat, I'll say, was a 25-foot Pen Yen, and that was 3 or 4 years ago now that I had a group that came out for LCI weekend. And everybody probably knows where that is, just north of Converse. So Lake Ontario, I charter out Oswego on the east end of Lake Ontario. I know there's getting to be a bigger group of followers that started with Ron years ago, going out to the west end. The Niagara River is on the west end of the lake, and our salmon start their season normally out there, move their way across the lake to our end of the lake, usually by mid to late summer, July through August into September. And obviously their goal is to spawn in the Salmon River, which is where the Salmon River hatchery is. I go out to the State of the Lake meeting every year, which was just this last week out in Pulaski. They have one in Rochester and one in Pulaski. And it, just like you guys did here, you got a chance to listen to a lot of biologists, find out information about the fishery out there. And the last 2 years, they've invited Ontario Ministries for the Fisheries to come down. And they're doing a study on steelhead right now. And it was really neat, some interesting information compared to what we just heard in knowing how far our fish actually travel. 2 years ago, in the fall, Ontario started tagging steelhead, a very small group of them. In 6 days, I got a phone call already, and they're like, you gotta be kidding, we just put these in the lake. No lie, they put a fish in Toronto, and in 6 days, they caught it to headwaters up in Altmar on the Salmon River. Steelhead was tagged, went 204 miles in 6 days. So you think our fish can travel? Heck yeah. They cover a lot of ground, depending on what their noses are telling them in the time of year for feed. So that's just some, some trivia that, no question, these fish travel a lot. Kings and cohos are what we target on Lake Ontario. Again, everyday variant, and you guys know, if you spend any time, watching what your fish finders do, what your equipment's telling you, if you got a bait ball that's a little above temp and there's arcs in it, you're going to put your baits there. But predominantly, we got to have a starting area somewhere. And with the Kings, I'm usually setting them a little colder. 42 to 44 is what we call ice box. I'm always going to have a lure down there. And then that 46 to 48 area is where I'll stack the majority of my baits. And again, depending on where I'm seeing the target bait, is where I'm going to be putting the vast majority of my lures. Obviously, depending on the time of year we're out there. Brownies, they prefer 54 to 60. That 56, 68 degree area is really good. This time of year, you can catch them in 6 foot of water right now. They're right inshore. Any place you've got some stained water coming in off a creek that's got water literally 1 or 2 degrees warmer than the surface temp is where you're going to find the browns right now. Summertime, once the thermocline's established, and in the last 2 years, that's been late. We've had, as we know, 2 terrible winters in 40-year history. Lake Ontario was no exception. 60% ice coverage in the last 2 winters out there. Well, it takes that much longer for that lake to warm up, roll over. Thermoclines weren't established until July out there last year. So again, where you find that thermocline is where you're going to find your browns. So if you put your probe down, you find 58 degrees down 75 feet deep out over 200 foot of water, slide into 75 foot of water, put your baits there and start, and that's where your browns are going to be most generally. And browns like structure. They're usually looking for rocks and crevices and stuff. If you see any sort of change in your bottom structure, you'll find the browns there in the summertime. And many days when our salmon are being temperamental, or they're not around, we switch over to browns and Lakers out there. So again, knowing where to target them. Steelies, usually they're a little bit offshore on the east end of the lake, usually anywhere from 2 to 4 miles. Oswego is one of the only ports that has a claim to fame for every mile you go offshore. For the most part, generally, you're going to gain 100 foot of water. The last 2 years, we've gone even further offshore. There was a couple days last year I was out 14 miles to find fish. We just had some bad winds over a couple-day period and screwed our water temperatures all up. Temp changes, bait leaves, your predator fish leave. That's all there is to it. You got to put some mileage on to find them. But generally, out within 2 to 3 miles, we can find steelhead. And many times, if I'm running, a 2 or 4 rigger spread, I'll have 2 deep riggers down for kings with flasher on them. And then I'll have 2 riggers run high with clean spoons on them for my steelhead. Same thing with my, my divers. I'll have 2 divers deep, 2 divers high. You've got a video coming up to see just how goofy we can get with how many lines we put in the water out there. But again, knowing your target species and where the temp's going to be is critical in how much stuff you want to put in the water. Everybody goes out to Lake Ontario for the reason that it is literally a world-class fishery. It comes with world-class competition. There's 300 some odd licensed charter captains in Lake Ontario, so every port's got varying different numbers of charter captains that run trips out there. But the chance to catch the species that are from the West Coast, where the genus is from, and obviously getting fish with some size to them. And this coho on the left is actually a hybrid. It's one of the biggest I've put in my boat in my history. Was 34 and change. The brown on the right is 12, 13 pounds. So again, you just look at the size what they get out there. So a quick video I'm going to play, folks. This one's almost 20 minutes long. We're only watching like the first 5 minutes, just to give you an idea of what we're going to talk about when we get into tactics later on. Hopefully I can get this to play. Oh, come on. Okay. Alright. I run a GoPro up on my rocket launchers, and it's tough being the captain, the net man, the rigger, and the cameraman all in the same shot. Some days my son goes out and drives for me, my dad does, another young lad out that lives in Oswego mates for me son. A little history about this actual group on the trip. This trip means the world to me. A young lady that was on the rod this particular day was fighting breast cancer, and is still with us today. They've done a trip with me just about every year. But she's hooked up on a dipsy, so I like this video. Why I throw it in here is to give everybody a chance. I've got 9 rods in the water right now, and there's 5 riggers out, but only 3 of them are actually in the water. And the center shoot rigger actually caught a fish 10 minutes before this, and it's up out of the water, so there's only 2 riggers in the water. But we're running dual dipsies plus coppers out on each side. You can kind of see in the video there's planer boards out each side. And we're going to talk about copper later on. We'll talk about its use, and that yes, we can use copper here in Champlain. It is an eagle tool. On lead core we run copper, we run wire dipsies, braided dipsies. It all depends on where the fish are, how deep they are, and what we're trying to target. And this particular fish is hooked up on a wire dipsy rod. I run 10-foot wire rods. The wire obviously has 0 stretch. We run traditional dipsies off the wire, but I also run slide divers off my wire with 50-pound mono, and just tie an Albright off the wire, run like a 30-foot section of 50-pound mono, and then run the slide diver off from that. And obviously, a lot of people use slide divers here. The best thing with a slide diver is I can get that lure that much further out away from the dipsy. The biggest plus for me as a captain is I don't have to reach around and net that fish, and you're going to see the exact reason why. On my Baja, this young lady's going to have to back up under the hard top because I'm running a 12.5 lead off from the diver itself. And if this particular day I didn't have my son with me, and he's getting better each year, he's 14 now, a lot of times I'll tell him leave the wheel and hit the autopilot. He'll come up and he'll help the client hand line the dipsy up for me, and I'll reach down and net the fish. And I would much rather run a 10-foot lead off the dipsies, but many times those kings are just that temperamental that you need a longer lead for them. So we'll see this fish hit the net, and as I said, we'll move on in the PowerPoint. But one thing I can certainly say, and obviously everybody's got different levels of pocketbooks, but you can never have too many rod holders. And we move stuff around constantly, depending on where the fish wants to head, how many cables I've got in the water. In this particular day, we got a good old Lake Ontario foot chop. It wasn't rough by any stretch. And this fish cooperated and came right down the chute. But many times they want to kind of move around, and so I'll pull riggers in out of I'll dance rigger rods off to one side or the other. But we'll see the dipsy come up here in a split second. For those of you who've never run wire before, we have to run twilly tips. So this is a 10-foot rod with a twilly, and you can see it right there. The dipsy's at the full extension. I don't run snubbers out there. I used to. I broke enough to say the heck with that. Our kings get pretty violent come August. This is like a 12 or 14-pound king, not a monster by any stretch. But you can see that she had to go right out of the camera view because I was running a long lead on that. So obviously that's the downside of running your standard dipsies is you don't have that stretch. And that's that group. But as you see, we got a couple steelies mixed in with some adult kings. That particular day, we were out 5-6 miles. 600 foot of water seemed to be pretty good. And you can see the sunburns and a lot of sun that we caught out there, but put some fish in the boat too. I dabble in doing a little bit of tournament fishing. Tournament's fun. I like the competition. It's addictive, but it can be costly too. A lot of the pro-ams out there, the entry fees are $700 to $1,000 for a 3-day gig, and you got to be good and catch a lot of fish to pay those bills back. A couple of years ago, those of you who met Captain Eric Steele from Mad Sierra, he comes up occasionally. Him and I are on a tournament team together, and we gave it a shot and did pretty well. And wasn't to toot our horn of the fish we caught, it was the learning experience. We sat back at the end of the weekend, made a little money, paid our bills, but we looked at our GPS, and the key part, folks, we found a drop break about 275 foot of water. We went to 300. And on the graph, you could see that subtle change. That subtle change made a lot in current out there. And that's where the bait was hanging. We had 14 waypoints in less than a half-mile circle that weekend. So of the 20-some-odd waypoints we put on the chart, we obviously knew that that break was critical in finding those fish. And I had 2 different charter captains I know very well out there that came way below us out of the 38 teams. And they're like, where'd you catch all the kings? I said, right out the front door. And it was key to being in that one spot because there was other guys that came in with 1 or 2 fish. Again, paying attention to electronics is very key. So obviously, I think we all know what our fish are feeding on. The alewife moved in, 12, 14 years ago? Where'd Paul go? How long we've been seeing alewives here now? Somewhere in that timeline, which was about the same timeline that the round goby moved into Lake Ontario. Totally changed some things out there. The alewife is exactly what the trophy fishery is built upon out in Lake Ontario. And it has its ups and downs, and right now the Lake Ontario fishery is in a little bit of a downturn because of the last 2 tough winters really hurt the plankton levels, and the plankton are what those bait fish need to feed on. So with a little bit reduced plankton level, now you got some weakened alewives, and that increased the thiaminese in those predator fish out there. And with the increased thiaminese, we got problems, as we know, here with our Atlantics. The steelies do the same thing out there. And we've been seeing some whirling in the rivers the last 2 winters. It hasn't been nearly as prevalent this winter as it was last year. And I think with this real warm winter, it's going to be even better next year. So obviously Mother Nature holds the trump card. The round goby, they moved into Lake Ontario, as I said, 12, 14 years ago now. Came in the bilge of ships. It came out of the St. Lawrence Seaway. They're a bottom dweller. And at first everybody was up in arms. They're going to ruin the fishery. Have they helped it? It depends on how you look at it. The browns and the smallmouth bass absolutely gorge themselves on them. So you got to know where to target them, especially the guys that were big smallmouth fishermen out there for years. Could go out in 20 foot of water and check out, put a crayfish in or a minnow on a bobber, and you could catch smallies. And all of a sudden, well, the smallies left. No, they didn't. They went out to deeper water. They just followed the gobies. And they're out in 60 to 90 foot of water now, right where the browns are, depending on the water temperature. And I catch smallmouths right in when I'm trolling for browns. The gobies have now moved into Lake Oneida, and anybody that does any walleye fishing knows Lake Oneida, not too far from Oswego, is a walleye factory. And I stay in contact with a bunch of different guides out there, and the gobies have really piled in there now too. So it's going to change that fishery. In just the last 2 years, the walleyes and the smallmouth bass have put on a couple pounds apiece due to the gobies. It's just knowing how to deal with them. And obviously, depending on the lures you're running, many days when I target browns in the summertime, I'm running more duller color spoons that imitate those brown colored gobies. And the gobies, as I said, are strictly bottom dwellers, where obviously the alewives and the smelt are suspended. So a little bit about the lures that I run, and again, I gear this presentation, folks, with a lot of times that I'm doing at the sportsman shows with people that don't know a heck of a lot about trolling. So just a smattering of stuff out there. And I think like everybody here, everybody looks through any individual's tackle boxes and the hundreds of spoons that you may have. And every day is different, from running speedy shiners to crazy Ivans to scorpions, Northport nailers, high techs, you name it. I'm running something different every day. My primary waters that I fish are from Westport up to the Shelburne Bay area. And that stretch of the lake that everybody knows Converse really well, again, depending on the time of year, lighter colors up high in the column as we go deeper. A lot of last year, those deep salmon I was telling you about that I was catching, black and purples were huge for me, with any sort of little small gold or silver specks in them. So, I'm no artist. There's days that I've got tape or I've got paint on the boat, and I try to doctor up something that's working pretty close. But late in the summer, in July, black and purples were really good for me. So the Dodger fly, again, I think a lot of times in the springtime when I grew up as a kid trolling, on my smaller boats running lead core on, on like Dunmore or Bombazine, we always had a Dodger fly out. Stick baits, obviously in the springtime are great when the fish are up high, as we are when we brown trout fish out in Ontario. As I said, spoons, different colors, different sizes, and tapes. The Lakers, I run magnums, for kings out in Ontario. And don't be afraid to throw down a big spoon. Big bait, big fish. No question about it that, I'll have a smattering of different spoons, especially if I've done trip after trip for a couple of days straight, to know the ones that are working. But if things all of a sudden slow down, don't hesitate to throw something bigger down there and see if that's what they're looking for. It certainly can't hurt to mix things up. And of course, the tackle shops love it when you buy more spoons. So here's a day right out in front of Westport, dead center of the lake last year. I definitely will say, and again, getting the chance to listen to the biologists, I was tickle pink with the salmon fishing last year. Many days, even the dead of summer, 90 degrees out, that I normally would have gone over to a lake trout program, I stayed on the salmon. And we had plenty of action for the clients. And there's such a big difference between having experienced people on the boat that know how to run ultralight rods when you got a 7 or 8 pound salmon on, versus having clients that I'm constantly teaching. And we lost a lot of fish at the back of the boat that people got a little anxious when they get them right there and you don't get them in the net yet. That no question were bigger than we're seeing here, but it's nice to see that our salmon are good numbers around. Lakers, I think everybody knows about bottom bouncing for Lakers, and whether it's inlines or vertical blades, and I've got a couple of dozen different styles of blades that I run. The new UV stuff has been really good. I experimented here in Champlain. I run a ton of UV flashers out in Ontario for my kings, and the Lakers like them too. Behind the blades, everything from a spoon to a peanut to a spinning glow to small stick baits. I constantly throwing it out there and trying something different every day, and what they want. And obviously, when you find what they want, they're there. There's certainly plenty of numbers for them. This particular group is from Virginia. It's one of my cousins, but they all live down there. They come up every year. They like to go out lake trout fishing. So obviously, the fish are there when we want them, and I couldn't tell you how many we released that day as well. Obviously, great action for the families, and for me, a lot of my local folks from here in Vermont come out to Ontario with me, and the groups that I get to come to Champlain are from other states that are a lot of times out of state on a vacation of some sort, and both of these groups are folks from out of state, and again, a chance to sample what we have right here in our own waters. So now I'll switch over to Ontario as far as lures, and then we'll break into the second part of my PowerPoint where we get into tactics a lot more. Out in Ontario, the Dodger fly or flasher fly or whatever you want to call it, again, the tactic was derived from the West Coast, Oregon, British Columbia, Washington, where they troll in the ocean for salmon. We've pretty much taken on the same thing back here. I'm not, as I said, not sponsors. I run a ton of atomic flies. They're made by Tommy Allen right in Ontario, and Tommy's become a very good friend of mine. He's not a charter captain. He's got an incredible business. He's selling flies all over the Great Lakes, and they're a great product. And I've got hundreds of the foolish things in my boat, and every day is different. There's certain colors, just like my spoons, that I'm always going to have down. And then other days, we just keep experimenting. First thing in the morning, I'm always going to have some glow stuff in the water. White chips, white spin doctors with green on it of some shape or fashion. Green's huge. If you saw anybody that's fished Ontario, you see the green hue in the water we've got out there. Green is critical with a lot of the different colors we run. Spoons, again, Stingray, NK28s, Magnum Stingers, a company of any of you that fish out in Ontario, Finger Lakes Tackle. Bobby Fuller owns them. He makes custom spoons out there. I run a ton of those. And of course, late in the season, we move into September, I've always got a J-plug in the pattern too. J-plugs are nothing more than an irritator bait. They've got a real tight wiggle to them. And kings are in the piss-off mode, if you will, by the time they're getting ready to hit the river. So it can't hurt to have a J-plug in the pattern as well. And when the king bites hot, it can be a lot of fun. Again, nice to have the chance to put those size fish. And these are all kings over 20 pounds. We aren't seeing the size that you did 20, 25 years ago. Chance of getting a 40-pound king is pretty slim. 30s are still a possibility. The vast majority of our kings are in that 20. The adult kings are in that 20 to 25 range. The good ones are going 27 to 30, 32 pounds. And obviously a nice mixed catch. Many days the kings will be hot first thing in the morning. They kind of pick away at them later in the day. And we'll get browns and Lakers mixed in with them too. And you know, again, a nice mixed bag that you've got different opportunities to put in the boat. Again, as I said, find your thermocline, find the bottom, you'll find browns. The deep water, this particular king, or excuse me, steelhead on the right is just taken this last summer. Another one of my best to date. And this 14-pound steely came out of the water 6 times and danced like a fool before we put it in the net. And every time it came out, I was biting my fingernails. I thought for sure we were going to lose it. But young lady did fantastic on a rod and put it in the boat nicely. So again, you know, the quality that you can find out there. The brown on the left is an absolute pig. And my best to date is on the wall. This young gentleman's got it at home. We were fishing 4 browns, and I thought for sure until that fish was 3 feet from the surface it was just a big old lake trout, because it never moved. It came up real slow. We just took our time with it. But that's the football browns that you can get out there. Everybody asks about brown trout. If you're looking for numbers, springtime, and they're catching them right now. And literally, this is obviously early. Normally by April into mid-May, you're going to look at numbers, not so much size. The trophy browns, these big guys, we find in June and July. The smaller 2-year-old browns tend to spread out. And once that thermocline hits, the big guys come in really pounding on the bait. You're not going to catch the numbers of them, but you're going to obviously see the better mix of those 10 to 12, 14 pounders with a chance to catch a true trophy. So as I said, this is kind of a split in my presentation. We talked a lot about spoons, streamers, the target species that we work in, and how do we catch them. Anybody here not ever heard of cheaters or sliders? And a lot of people ask me about them. If anybody wants a description of them, certainly go over it, but I think probably the next part of my presentation a lot of folks probably want to hear about. But again, I run both cheaters, fixed and sliders every day, different number of spoons in the water, trying to find out what those fish want, both here and on Ontario. Many times I'll run a flasher fly off the rigger, and of course with flashers they rotate. They've got a 6 to 8 foot swing to them. So you can only run them on average 12 to 15 feet behind the ball, or else when you make corners they're going to tangle with each other. So many times I'll run the slider up high and I'll put a second spoon above that flasher so I can grab the steelies and browns that might be staggered up there too. And again, just the differing tactics that you can run from day to day. So obviously downriggers are the first and foremost. I grew up on cannons, that's what I run today. I certainly wouldn't say that they're the best. There's been plenty of days I've had to fix them on the fly, so I know how to fix them when they give me headaches out on the water. I guess I would always say that whatever you're comfortable with, you grew up with, probably. The biggest thing that I would definitely say with the cannons, out in Ontario we run 14 and 16 pound weights, because we're fishing so doggone deep in the summertime. There's not unheard of to catch a king 150 feet deep. So if you don't have at least a 14-pound weight, you've got so much blowback that it's really hard to say, yes, I know my baits are running true where I expect them to be. And I run a Furuno fish finder out there, and I'll usually set my transducer that I can watch my cables and have a really good idea where, in relationship to the thermocline and bait, where I'm expecting my cables to be. Once we've got a rigger set, then I can dial in my pattern with my both my dipsies and my coppers later on. So this is the meat and potatoes of what probably a lot of you would want to hear about and learn about. The junk lines, if you will. That's what everybody out in the big lake calls them, are junk lines. It's these junk lines that put the fish in the boat for us. I can always catch fish off the riggers out there first thing in the morning. Many times they get spooky with the cable, especially the kings. And running dipsies and coppers are where the meat and potatoes of our fish will come from. I would not lie to say probably 70% of my fish come on dipsy divers out there. The dipsies get those baits out away from the boat. I run slide divers and standard dipsies. I'll run mag dipsies and a standard dipsy on one side of the boat, so I've got staggered depths and knowing where I'm expecting my baits to be. And we're going to talk about that type of stuff. Lead core is great, especially with brownie fishing. And again, I run lead core here too. And if anybody's got questions about, please stick a hand up, just cut me off, because tactics that I do run out in Ontario, I can run here. I wouldn't tell you that I run a 600 copper on Lake Champlain very frequently. Matter of fact, I try to avoid it in Ontario. But a 250 copper and a 300 copper, I run them here. Many times I'll take that copper and run it down the chute of my boat and have lead cores out of my planer boards. And it's just different levels depending on what those salmon are doing. Many days I'll have a 5-color core and a 10-color core, one on each side. and then run, you know, I've got a 300 copper on a line counter reel, and I'll run that down the chute, and the line counter tells me just how much of copper I've got out, and I'll run that based on where I think the fish are. And we'll talk about how do we know where the copper is running in just a little bit. The lead core, the best thing, if nobody's ever run it, obviously, you get a chance to go out and try it, it undulates. It's got that rise and fall pattern, especially when you're making your corners, and it really adds a lot more action to the lures out there. So for salmon here and for my browns out in Ontario, I've got 4 or 5 different lead core rigs on the boat, and just having a couple of different cores to add out to the planer boards can make or break putting those extra fish in the boat. As I said with the dipsies, out Ontario we run 40-pound wire, and the wire itself is, some say it emits an electrical signal down there, and again, whether you believe in that stuff or not, I can tell you that I've put I'll put braid down one side and test it fish to fish with the wire on the opposite side, and for me, the wire outfires 3 to 1. There's no question that having that nose stretch is critical with the depths that we're running. And as I said, many days I'm running dual dipsies. I'll run a standard size 1 dipsy set on like a 3.5 setting, and I'll run those lures high with just spoons, and then behind that I'll run a mag on like a number 1 setting, and that's digging a lot deeper, but it's a lot shorter to the boat, and I'll run a flasher fly on that. So they've got a great spread both horizontally and diagonally to where those dipsies are running out there in the water. And some days just 2 dipsies is all you need. The fish have to tell you what you're going to run. Brownies, I run the same system that I do for my salmon here. Slide divers on braid, 50-pound braid with like a 30-pound mono. I got a 50, I think both of mine I run a 50-foot section of mono. And then again, let the fish tell me how far I'm going to stretch the lure behind the slide diver. And the differing ring, the nice thing is we all know with slide divers you can change up the weights, you can change up the rings, and every day I'm mixing them up to see just where I expect my fish to be. Again, torpedo wire is what I run. I put a whole 1,000-foot spool. I'm obviously running big saltwater size reels when you start looking at wire and copper. I put a whole 1,000-footer on it once. I don't run any backing on my wires. It's nothing to say you can't do it, but to me it's one less junction to break when those nasty kings smack something. And as the days go on, you get little kinks in the wire, you take a pair of side cutter pliers and cut those kinks out. Throughout the season, your wire's getting shorter, down to an 800, down to a 700. So at the end of the season, I strip them out, and I'll start off my summer, put another whole spool of 1,000 on. Slide divers, I run them, and again, I'm not going to spend any time on them, because I think, without a doubt, our fishermen here in Champlain have probably got a much better grasp at running slide divers than any of the other places that I run. I'm surprised how few guys run them out in Ontario. And I love them, and I've got at least a half dozen in the boat of different sizes, and if there's anybody here that's got any questions about them, there's probably guys here who got a lot more time in using them than I do, but you can't beat them. They're an awesome tool, and without a doubt can make a big difference in adding some fish to the boat. Quick little video here. This is LCI. Take a close look, because some of you are probably in this video. This is Father's Day 2 years ago, and I had a chance to do a little quick video shot just to add something to my website. But this is double dipsy slide divers that took off at the same time, and just a neat little video. There was a fair amount of boats around this.
I don't know who says you can't double up on Lake Champlain, but I've got the BX. Senior and junior doubled up on dipsies on Lake Champlain.
If anybody knows any of the guys from Proctor, Frank Viet Jr. on the left owns a restaurant down there, and his dad come up fish with me every year.
After Father's Day, and these guys are working a lake trout. Bruce just put one in the box. Had a fairly decent day going. Can't find the salmon if the lake trout are playing.
We got a couple salmon early in the morning, and they shut off and were being a pain in the butt, and these guys didn't care, they just wanted to catch fish, so we went to lake fishing. There's probably not one person in here, if you fish Converse at all, we'll go right where we are, past the split rock.
Only because I had 240 and 280 out on the dipsy on these guys. Marking fish down about 80 and 100 foot down, so they're getting a workout. Nice and easy, Ray, don't kill yourself, man, just take your time cranking them in. Alright, so I'm going to let Bruce try and do double duty steering and videotape while I work with these guys. There you go.
Keep an eye on Frank Jr. on the left, and I think we all know the importance of keeping the rod loaded when we got a fish hooked up. He took his eye off the game for a split second as I went to net Dad's fish. I turned to him, and I knew because he quit cranking. I said, where'd your fish go? Not there. So, like I said, just some days it's hard to keep track of everybody and train them, and but they really didn't care. They were having fun. This one little point here at the end here, and seeing the slide diver when it comes up. I run a fluorocarbon leader below the slide diver. Many times I'll put a swivel with a bead on there, and to me, just having that added fluorocarbon, a little bit more stealthiness down there with a spoon. So you're going to see the slide diver pop up, and then some, a lot of people say, well, wait a minute, how come it didn't go all the way down to the fish? And it's because I like to run fluorocarbon here on Champlain. On Ontario, I don't need to. When you're running paddles and dodges all the time, you need the strength there. So you can see the short leader that went down from the fish to the slide diver. To me, 10 or 12 pound fluorocarbon works pretty well and adds a little stealth to it. Again, there's other diving aids out there, and you can use these in conjunction with your lead core and your coppers. I experiment a lot with both torpedoes and dive bombs. They come in 2 to 10 or 12 ounces a piece, folks, so you can add extra weight, and they all come with dive charts with them. So not only just your standard dipsies, and you can get real stealthy as much as you want to experiment. You can take a dive bomb or a torpedo, run them out 15, 20 feet, clamp them into your downrigger release. Now you got a stealthy presentation that you can drop a lure below your downrigger ball. And if you think those fish have been getting spooky because of the cable and the weights, now you got a stealth that you can do. We also take the small size 2 dipsy. We call those a down and out. Same thing. I'll run like a 10 or 12 foot leader off the dipsy, run that out 15, 20 feet, clasp it into the downrigger cable or the downrigger release. And if I've normally been catching my fish 75 foot down, I'll only drop the rigger down and say 60 feet. And now I've got a lure presentation down below that rigger ball, and just adding some stealth to everything. And many days, if your bite suddenly shut off, what caused them to shut off? Was it boat traffic, high sun, color change? Try switching it up and running some of these. And many days when I hear guys saying, well, I only run 400, 500, and 600 copper sections. And everybody says, well, I'm catching them on a 450 copper. Well, I'll add like a 4 or 5 ounce dive bomb on there, and now I get that 400 copper to grab me a couple extra feet to the depth that it's designed to run at. And it'll just add our catches to it. So as I said, dive bombs, torpedoes, 2 to 10 ounces. You can run them on anything, mono, braid, wire, copper, whatever you want. They just clip on there. And the downfall is the client cranks the fish in. I got to get that weight off from there so they can keep cranking them close enough that I can actually net the fish. But as a pleasantry with them, you can stretch your lead out as far away from it as you want. Last but not least, this evil thing called copper. And it's one of those things that I've always got in the boat, and many days if boat traffic will allow me to, I'll run them out there. It definitely adds, for us in Ontario, adds those extra hits to help with our limit each day. I run 45 pound copper, and 45 pound copper is going to sink on average at 2 to 2.5 mile troll speed. So a lot of the stuff when we talk about sink rates, folks, is going to be greatly indicative of what your trolling speed is. So you're obviously going to gain more depth the slower you're going. And I run a fish hawk, and I run my speeds off my fish hawk and what I've been used to for years. Traditionally with my salmon spread, I'm running 2.4 to 2.6, and that range somewhere. For me, it works both here on Champlain and in Ontario. Obviously, Lakers run a little slower generally. Brownies, they like a little faster. Many days, 2.6, 2.7. Striper fishing on the Hudson, I'm trolling at 3.2 to 3.5 most days. They want those stick baits just screaming by them. So, again, everything varies in what you're running out behind the boat. 45 pound copper is going to get you 22 feet for every 100 out. So those days that I'm catching, kings down 120, 115, at 5, 6, even 700 coppers guys are running out there. And I absolutely refuse to run anything more than a 600 copper. But because the client's got to crank in 600 feet of copper plus a 30-foot leader before the fish gets there. And there's a reason we call the 600 copper the client killer, because it's amazing. You get groups on the boat, dipsies and riggers are going, everybody's jumping for joy. Copper fires, I ain't touching that. Nobody will go over and grab it. They'll fight over who wants to get the next rod. So, they get smart to it. But, copper is definitely something to run. I just started experimenting this year, a company out west called Blood Run Copper. They run a 60 pound copper, and it gets deeper quicker, so you don't have to run nearly as much out there. And again, just something else to experiment with. This video should tip when I hit it to play, I believe. it's going to.
How you feel, Dad?
This is a 400 copper Labor Day weekend last year.
You're doing an incredible job on the copper walk. We've got
there was the last fish of the day. It was a 6-hour trip. We're done at noontime. It's like quarter after 11. And Deb was at the back of the boat trying to crank this fish in. I showed her how to do the copper walk. I said, why don't you drag the fish in and reel as you go back? So she was pretty tickled to be able to see that you don't have to sit here and crank these fish in all the time. But again, this one I was running down the chute. I didn't have it out on planer boards. Early in the morning we had a lot of boat traffic, and I decided to just run one copper down the chute instead of having it out on the boards. But as you can see, it does work. That 27-pound king was on that 400 copper, and that's when we ended the day off in that group. Copper you can buy in big spools. I don't buy large spools. I don't have meters that I usually buy it pre-packaged. Again, Tommy Allen from Atomic Flies. Any of the sporting goods shops out in the Great Lakes have got it. And again, you got to run bigger reels. I run Penns and Shimano's for that copper just because of you do have to run backing on these guys. The bigger the copper, the less backing because the king's just got to drag it around. I usually run 300, maybe 400 feet of backing. 50-pound braid, again, is what I run behind the copper on the big ones. The 200s and 300s, I might have 500, 600 feet of backing on there because if we're running them that higher in a column, it's generally earlier in the season. The kings are full of a lot more spunk at that point, so you got to have that much more backing on them when they want to make runs on you. You know, again, you can run the copper out off from boards. You can run it. I run it off from inline boards and my big otter boats, and I definitely much rather run it off from otter boats when it comes to having clients because they don't have to toy around with an inline board. Doesn't mean you can't run inlines. I run the TX44s on a 500 copper and it'll tow them around fine. But the big boards definitely make life a lot easier for us. 300s, 500s, you can catch whatever. This big laker on the left there. We had 3 kings going at once, and I slowed the boat down to try and get all 3 kings in, and the copper took off. And I said, no, doggone well, that's a lake trout there, and it was. You know, and if it's swimming, we'll definitely hit the coppers. Obviously, it depends on the day, and this group on the right was a 3-boat charter I did here in Champlain, and we just took all the boys out, and I think they were out of beer before we got down to the end of Otter Creek, so I don't know what they did for the rest of the day, but they are all smiles, a group of landscapers from Rutland that came up. But, you know, again, as I said, don't be afraid to experiment, and every day is different. I'll have different junk in the water, and trying things that may or may not work, and just getting the chance to experiment. Like I said, if when you think it wouldn't work, that's the day that it'll probably work. Try something that's so totally out of the norm and to put those extra fish in the boat. Now that I'm done with that portion, question and answer time. Anybody?
Matt, have you caught any Atlantics?
Yeah, actually last year we got a couple. Out in Ontario, they're few and far between. The province of Ontario is doing a stocking program. New York has experimented a little bit. They're not doing much right now. They primarily, the Salmon River hatchery is for kings, cohos, and steelhead only. But the Atlantics that we do occasionally get are good ones. I got a couple last year that were 10, 11 pounds. A couple of my buddies got one 14 and 17 pounds. So, and it'd be no different than we get them here. They come rocketing out of the water, you know, when they hook up. When the cohos come around, cohos generally tail end of the season. Usually by Labor Day end of September, you know the cohos are around because they love to nab and run. They come up, tap your lures, and they'll get hooked up, and you get false releases all the time. So when the false releases start, you know the cohos are in town. But when they hook up, they're a lot like the Atlantics. Many times they come skyrocketing out of the water too, so you have a pretty good idea. Jeff?
What does that copper do to the line guides on your rod?
It doesn't do anything. Copper's soft, so it doesn't hurt your guides at all. You can run, the Okuma makes a specific rod for copper and lead core, and I run all of those. But unlike wire, it will not cut your guides or eyes on your rods. If you're running wire, yeah, you gotta run twilly tips on the end of the rods, or it's going to chew them right up in a couple of fish. So you don't have to change things up with copper. Hopefully I didn't bore everybody to death. This is probably the most experienced group that I ever get a chance to chat with. But the drift boat trip that we're going to pull out of the hat here in just a minute is for the Salmon River. It's for a group of 2, and it's a 6-hour drift boat trip, steelhead. Traditionally, and I know I'm going to piss some people off here, frostbite time, November right through the winter time into the spring. I do king salmon trips out there. tail end of September through October is when we're catching kings in the river. So this will be for steelhead. But again, thank you all for taking the chance to listen to me blabber. Keep this on. Call who gets a chance to go on a drift boat ride. If anybody wants to see what we catch in the drift boat, there's a photo out there too. 709-412. 412. There we go. All right, sir. Congratulations. Look forward to it. Give me a call, grab one of my brochures, and you can give me a call and we'll get it scheduled for you.
Okay.
Thank you again, folks.